Do not blame the human for surviving what your children were never taught to face. Professor Adrian Voss said it with the emergency lights still flashing red across the classroom walls, and nobody in Valorian Interstellar Academy laughed after that. 6 minutes earlier, they had been laughing at Nolan Pierce. 6 minutes earlier, Darius Core had called him a quiet little deathworlder from a mud planet, the kind of soft-skinned mammal that only looked dangerous in old war stories and embassy warnings written by nervous politicians. Now Darius stood near the back wall with both hands pressed flat against the glass, his gray face drained of color, his expensive academy jacket torn at the sleeve, his mouth open but useless. Across the room, Serafina Vale, top student in xenosurvival ethics, daughter of a fleet governor, and the girl who had spent half the semester pretending Nolan did not exist, was staring at him like she had just realized the word primitive did not mean what she thought it meant. Nolan Pierce sat on the floor in the middle of the wrecked training room, one knee up, one hand pressed against his left shoulder, breathing slow through his nose, because that was what his father had taught him back home in Montana. In through the nose. Hold it. Out through the mouth. Do not let pain drive the truck. Do not let fear touch the wheel. His coffee from that morning was still somewhere under an overturned desk, probably leaking into the polished floor panels, and for some stupid reason that bothered him more than it should have. He had paid 6 credits for it. It had tasted burned, like every other cup on campus, but it had been warm, and it had been normal, and Nolan would have given almost anything for normal right then. The classroom smelled like hot circuits, disinfectant foam, and the sharp metallic stink of broken safety equipment. The simulated sky above them had frozen on a blue prairie horizon, a cheerful fake Earth landscape the Academy used whenever it wanted to make alien students comfortable around human environments. Nolan almost laughed at that. They had gotten the clouds wrong. The room stayed silent except for the alarm clicking down from emergency level 3 to level 2. A containment team waited outside the sealed doors. No one rushed in yet. They were watching through the glass, trying to understand why 17 elite students were still alive, why the containment subject was secured without lethal force, and why the only person in the room who looked calm was the one they had spent all morning insulting. Professor Voss's voice came again over the wall speaker, thinner this time. Class, identify who initiated survival protocol. No one answered. Darius looked at the floor. 2 students looked at Serafina. Serafina looked at Nolan. He did not look back. He was busy flexing his fingers, making sure he could still feel them. Miss Vale, Voss said. Answer the question. Serafina swallowed, and when she spoke, her voice did not carry any of its usual polished pride. Nolan did. The speaker hummed. Please clarify. She turned toward the observation glass, standing straighter now, as if the truth itself had weight, and she had decided to lift it. Nolan Pierce initiated the survival protocol. Nolan Pierce warned us before the system failed. Nolan Pierce kept us quiet when we panicked. And Nolan Pierce saved Darius after Darius called him an animal. Nobody moved. Not Darius. Not the instructors outside. Not even Nolan, though something in his chest tightened hard enough to hurt worse than his shoulder. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted speeches, blame, apologies, or another report sent back to Earth with his name stamped all over it. He had wanted to pass the class, call his mom, and maybe find one person on this shining, perfect campus who could look at him without seeing a headline. Instead, the entire room was looking at him now. And 6 hours earlier, when Nolan Pierce walked into that same classroom with a cold coffee, a cheap notebook, and mud still dried on the heel of one boot from the academy courtyard, every single one of them had believed the same thing. The human was quiet because he was scared. Nolan Pierce had learned a long time ago that people stared less when you gave them nothing to work with, so that morning he kept his eyes forward, his shoulders loose, and his coffee in his right hand as he crossed the white stone courtyard of Valorian Interstellar Academy. The campus floated 600 feet above the city on anti-gravity pylons. All silver arches, glass bridges, and fountains that poured water upward because some architect thought normal gravity was too provincial. Nolan hated the fountains. They made him miss Montana in a way he could not explain to anyone here. Back home, water fell because that was what water did. Snow sat heavy on pine branches. Wind shoved against your jacket. Dirt stuck to your boots, and nobody treated it like a diplomatic incident. He glanced down at his left boot, where a little brown mud still clung to the heel from the academy courtyard garden. He had tried scraping it off on the curb, but Earth's soil had a stubbornness to it. His father would have called that a good sign. His mother would have told him to clean his shoes before class. He had an unread message from her sitting on his wrist terminal. Morning, honey. First full practical today, right? Eat something real. Nolan had stared at it during breakfast for almost 10 minutes and still had not answered. What was he supposed to say? Good morning, Mom. The children of admirals and planetary ministers keep asking whether humans sleep hanging from trees. The cafeteria oatmeal tastes like drywall. Everyone thinks I am either a dangerous animal or a charity case, depending on who is talking. Instead, he bought a coffee, burned his tongue on it, and walked to class. The academy doors opened before him with a soft chime. A pair of Thalassian students moved aside just a little too quickly when they saw the small blue earth patch on his sleeve. Not rude enough to report, not kind enough to ignore. Nolan kept walking. That was the trick. Keep walking. Do not make the ambassador's office send another polite message about cultural sensitivity. Do not give the news feeds a clip of the human exchange student losing his temper. Do not become the story they already believed. Pierce, called a voice from behind him. Nolan slowed, because pretending not to hear Darius' court only made things worse. Darius came up the hall with 3 other students around him, tall, sharp-shouldered, wearing his academy uniform like it was military dress. His skin had the flat charcoal tone of polished stone, and his family crest glowed faintly at his collar. I heard today's test involves predator response, Darius said. Try not to get homesick. One of the students laughed. Nolan took a sip of coffee. It was already cold. I will do my best. Darius stepped into his path, smiling like this was friendly. That is what worries me. Deathworlders doing their best is usually how buildings get evacuated. Nolan looked at him for one quiet second. Not angry, not afraid, just measuring, the way his father had taught him to measure a storm cloud over the ridge. Then he stepped around him. Class starts in 4 minutes. You always walk away, Darius said. Is that an Earth survival skill? Nolan stopped at the classroom door. For a moment, he could smell pine smoke from a wood stove that was not there. He could hear his father's voice on a cold trail outside Bozeman, calm as church bells. Fear is allowed. Panic is not. Nolan opened the door and went inside. The classroom was already half full, bright with floating screens and polished desks shaped for species Nolan could not name yet. Serafina Vale sat near the front, silver blue skin catching the morning light, posture perfect, notes already arranged in the air before her. She looked at the mud on Nolan's boot, then at the paper notebook under his arm, and her expression did not change. Somehow that made it worse. Nolan took his usual seat in the back row, set down his coffee, and opened the notebook to a clean page. At the top, he wrote the date, then the class title, then one sentence for himself where no translator could turn it into a diplomatic problem. Stay calm. That is the whole job. Professor Voss entered exactly on time, his long coat whispering over the floor as the doors sealed behind him. Today, he announced, we stop discussing survival and begin measuring it. The room stirred with excitement. Nolan clicked his pen once and looked toward the ceiling vents. Something in the air smelled raw. Professor Voss let the silence stretch until every floating screen in the room dimmed to a soft blue. He liked silence. Nolan could tell. Some teachers used it to calm a room down. Voss used it to remind students who owned the room in the first place. Civilized survival, Voss said, pacing between the desks, is not panic dressed up as courage. It is procedure. It is discipline. It is knowing that instinct belongs to lesser stages of evolution. A few students glanced back at Nolan before they could stop themselves. Darius did not bother hiding it. He leaned sideways in his seat, close enough for his translator collar to catch every word. Hear that, Pierce? Try not to drag us back into the caves. Nolan kept his pen moving. On the page, beneath the date, he wrote, Protocol is useful until the room stops following the script. Serafina Vale turned slightly, just enough to see what he was doing. Her eyes dropped to the paper notebook, then to the pen in his hand, then back to his face. You write manually? She asked. Her tone was polite, which somehow made it sharper. Yes. Why? Nolan looked up. It helps me remember. Darius gave a low laugh. So does a neural imprint, if your species has reached that chapter. The class laughed again, not loudly, not enough to be called cruel by academy standards, but enough to make the air feel smaller. Nolan felt heat rise in his neck. He let it pass. That was another thing Earth taught you early. Weather moved through. Feelings did too, if you did not grab them and make them worse. Professor Voss continued as if none of it mattered. Many young species mistake endurance for competence. They survive harsh climates, aggressive fauna, unstable weather, and primitive resource conflict, then assume this gives them a meaningful advantage in structured crisis environments. Nolan knew that sentence was aimed at him. Everyone knew. The Academy did not insult humans directly. It wrapped the insult in education and called it cultural analysis. With respect, Professor, Seraphina said, lifting one hand. Is there any verified evidence that humans respond better under pressure, or is that mostly diplomatic mythology from early contact? Voss smiled, pleased by the question. An excellent distinction, Miss Vale. Humanity has a remarkable tolerance for discomfort. That is not the same as leadership. Darius turned around fully now. So if the heating system fails, Pierce is our commander. More laughter. Nolan tapped his pen once against the paper. One tap only. Back home, his father used to say that anger was like a loaded truck on ice. Once it started sliding, it did not care where you meant to steer. Nolan had spent 19 years learning how not to slide. He took a slow breath and looked toward the ceiling vent again. There it was. Not just ozone. Something animal. Warm. Sour. Hidden under the sterile lemon smell of classroom disinfectant. Professor, Nolan said. Voss paused, visibly annoyed that the target of the lesson had decided to speak. Yes, Mr. Pierce. The room smells wrong. For half a second, nobody said anything. Then Darius put a hand over his chest like Nolan had wounded him with comedy. The room smells wrong, he repeated. Is that official Earth science? There is an organic scent coming from the east maintenance wall, Nolan said. And the vent cycle is off by maybe 3 seconds. Seraphina's expression tightened, not with concern, but with embarrassment for him. The Academy environmental system is automated. Automated things still break. Not here, she said. Nolan almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was the kind of thing people said right before finding out the universe did not respect expensive buildings. Voss folded his hands behind his back. Mr. Pierce, today's exercise is designed to test response behavior, not your personal discomfort with unfamiliar infrastructure. I am not uncomfortable. Then sit quietly. Nolan looked at the east wall. The polished panel there gave a faint tremor, so small most of the class missed it. His fingers tightened around the pen. Professor, I think you should pause the test. Darius groaned. Of course. The Deathworlder wants the safety button before we even start. Nolan turned to him at last. His voice stayed low, flat, almost tired. You talk too much when you are nervous. The laughter stopped for a beat. Darius's smile faded just enough to show Nolan had landed closer to the truth than he meant to. Voss lifted his hand, and the classroom lights shifted from blue to amber. Enough. Simulation begins in 30 seconds. Around the room, students straightened with practiced confidence. Desks folded into the floor. Holographic terrain rose in clean, beautiful lines. Seraphina stepped into the front position like she had been born there. Darius rolled his shoulders, ready to perform bravery in front of an audience. Nolan closed his notebook, slid it into his bag, and left the pen on top of the desk. The east wall trembled again. This time, Nolan heard something behind it breathe. The east wall breathed again, and Nolan knew with a sick little certainty that nobody else wanted to know it. The classroom had already changed around them, desks sinking into the floor, ceiling panels sliding back, the bright academy walls dissolving into a projected frontier settlement with low-supply huts, fake red dust, and a painted sunset stretching across the simulation dome. It looked clean, expensive, and completely useless. Real trouble never arrived with polished edges. Professor Voss stood on the raised instructor platform while small safety drones unfolded from the ceiling like silver insects. Your objective is simple, he said. Protect 3 civilian markers, identify the predator pattern, and reach the extraction gate before the timer expires. Leadership will be assigned by academic ranking. Seraphina stepped forward before he finished. Nobody challenged her. She had the grades, the family name, and the kind of calm that came from never being told she did not belong in a room. Voss nodded. Miss Vale, command is yours. Seraphina's eyes moved across the class like she was arranging pieces on a board. Core, forward response. Tauren, sensor watch. Mavek and Oro, civilian markers. Pierce, she paused just long enough for everyone to notice. Darius smiled. Put him somewhere safe. We do not want Earth filing a complaint because its exchange student got startled. A few students laughed. Serafina did not smile, but she did not correct him either. Pierce, rear position. Observe and stay clear of the first response team. Nolan looked at the east maintenance wall. The panel trembled once, then went still. I can help with perimeter check. Darius turned, spreading his arms as if Nolan had offered to fly. You can help by not confusing the simulation with a camping trip. Nolan let the words pass. He looked at Serafina instead. That wall is not part of the projection. Her blue-silver face tightened. The wall is reinforced academy construction. So was the bridge over Yellowstone until ice took out the supports, Nolan said. Strong things fail too. This is not Montana. That is what worries me. That landed wrong. He heard it as soon as he said it. To them, it sounded arrogant, like a human pretending his homeworld made him wiser than everyone else. Serafina's voice cooled. You have been assigned a role. Follow it. Nolan held her gaze for half a second, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. Darius snorted. At least he is trainable. The timer appeared in the air above them, counting down from 10. The projected settlement filled with soft wind and distant animal calls. Too perfect. Too even. Nolan crouched near the rear marker and pressed 2 fingers against the floor. A faint vibration moved through the composite, not from the speakers, not from the drones. Something with weight was shifting behind the wall. His stomach tightened. Not panic. Warning. There was a difference. His father had taught him that on a frozen road outside Bozeman, when Nolan was 12 and a bull elk had stepped out of the tree line at dusk, do not yell. Do not run. Read the animal before the animal reads you. Professor Voss, Nolan said, louder this time. I am requesting a safety pause. The timer hit 6. Voss looked disappointed, which was worse than anger. Denied. Fear response is part of the assessment. This is not fear. Darius laughed under his breath. Sure sounds like it. Nolan looked at him. Move your team 6 feet left. Why? Because if that wall opens, you are standing in the first clear path. Darius's smile hardened. There is no path. There is no wall failure. There is only you looking for an excuse. The timer hit 3. Serafina lifted her hand, ready to issue her first command. Nolan slowly set his bag down and unzipped it, not for a weapon, because students were not allowed to carry any, but for the old canvas belt he used to strap his books together. Serafina noticed. Pierce, what are you doing? The timer hit 1. Nolan wrapped the belt once around his wrist and kept his eyes on the east wall, preparing to be wrong. The simulation horn sounded. The holographic predator appeared exactly where it was supposed to, bright, clean, and harmless. Half the class turned toward it with practiced confidence. Then the east maintenance wall gave a low, ugly groan, and the fake animal call was swallowed by a real one. For one strange second, the classroom tried to pretend nothing had changed. The holographic predator kept pacing across the fake red dust exactly as programmed. All clean edges and academy-approved danger, while the east maintenance wall folded outward with a grinding sound that made every student turn cold. Behind it was not a monster from a lesson plan. It was a living thing, low to the floor, broad through the shoulders, covered in dark ridged plates that rose and fell with each breath. A razorback juvenile from Threx 9, Nolan guessed, though he had only seen one in a field guide during orientation. It was smaller than the adult diagrams, maybe 5 feet at the shoulder, but frightened enough to be twice as dangerous. One of its rear legs was tangled in a restraint loop, and a blinking transport tag flashed against its side. It had not come to hunt. It had been delivered to the wrong place, trapped in the wrong wall, under the wrong lights, surrounded by screaming children in expensive uniforms. Nobody move, Nolan said. His voice was not loud, but it cut clean through the room. For half a breath, they listened. Then Tauren shrieked, high and sharp, and the razorback jerked toward the sound. Quiet, Nolan snapped. All of you, quiet now. Serafina raised her wrist terminal. Emergency containment, classroom 12, live specimen breach. The terminal blinked red. No signal. She tried again, and her perfect calm cracked at the edges. Professor Voss, we have a live specimen in the room. From the instructor platform, Voss was already backing toward the sealed door, tapping commands into his console. This is a containment error. Remain in your assigned positions. Nolan stared at him. Are you serious? Darius stepped forward with the Academy stun baton from the simulation rack, the kind meant to tag holograms, and looked brave in a score report. I can drive it back. Nolan turned his head slowly. Do not raise that. You do not command me. That thing is scared. You flash light in its face. It will pick a direction and run through anything in that direction. Darius lifted the baton anyway. It gave off a bright blue pulse. The Razorback flinched, lowered its head, and scraped one foot against the floor. The sound was not theatrical. It was real, heavy, and close. The class went still. Nolan felt his heartbeat in his wrists. He was scared. Of course he was scared. Only idiots were not scared when 500 pounds of panicked muscle stood 20 feet away. But fear had a job. It was supposed to wake you up, not take over. Darius, Seraphina said, her voice tight. Lower it. Darius hesitated, caught between pride and common sense. That half-second was enough. The Razorback lunged toward the light. Not with cruelty, not with thought, just blind panic. Darius stumbled backward, dropped the baton, and fell against a collapsed desk. The blue pulse spun across the floor, flashing faster, making everything worse. Students shouted. Someone ran. The Razorback turned toward the movement. Nolan moved before he decided to. He kicked his bag across the floor, not at the animal, but past it. The canvas slid into a stack of projection rods with a loud clatter. The Razorback whipped toward that sound instead, buying 3 seconds. Lights off, Nolan said. No one moved. Seraphina, kill the lights. She blinked at him like the order had come from the floor itself. Then she snapped back. Tauren, manual panel, west side. Now. Tauren was shaking so badly he almost missed the panel, but he hit it. Half the room dropped into dim emergency red. The Razorback slowed. Nolan pointed to 2 students near the civilian markers. Hands low. Back against the wall. No running. He pointed at Darius without looking at him. Stay down and stop talking. Darius opened his mouth, then closed it. That was the first smart thing he had done all day. Professor Voss's voice came from the platform, strained now. Mr. Pierce, step away from the specimen. Nolan kept his eyes on the animal's shoulders, not its face. Professor, with respect, you lost the room 30 seconds ago. Nobody laughed. Nobody even breathed loudly. Nolan picked up his old canvas belt from where it hung around his wrist and spoke softer, the way his father had spoken to nervous horses, angry dogs, and once to a black bear outside a cabin in late October. Easy. Nobody here wants trouble. The Razorback huffed, confused by the lower sound. Nolan took one slow step sideways, drawing its attention away from the injured student pinned near the front marker. Seraphina saw what he was doing, and for the first time since he had met her, she did not look at him like a symbol, or a problem, or a rumor from Earth. She looked at him like he was the only person in the room who knew what came next. Nolan wished that were not true. Nolan did not become louder when the room fell apart. He became smaller, steadier, harder to notice until every frightened eye in the class had nowhere else to go. The Razorback shifted in the red emergency light, confused by the sudden quiet, its plated head swinging between the dropped stun baton and the students pressed against the wall. Nolan kept moving sideways, slow enough not to trigger it, deliberate enough to pull its attention with him. Seraphina, he said, his voice low. Those projection rods behind me. Are they fixed to the floor? She glanced over, still pale, but listening now. Magnetic base. Training equipment only. Can you unlock them? From the instructor console. Nolan looked at Professor Voss. The professor stood frozen on the raised platform, one hand over the controls, his face drained of all academic confidence. Professor, Nolan said, unlock the rods. Voss blinked. That is not a standard containment procedure. Nolan almost smiled. Almost. Neither is the animal in your wall. For a second, Voss looked offended. Then the Razorback huffed and stepped toward the injured student near the front marker, and pride finally lost to reality. Voss tapped the console. The rods gave a soft click as their bases released. Good, Nolan said. Tauren, Oro, slide them to me. Do not throw them. Tauren's hands shook as he pushed the first rod across the floor. It scraped too loudly. The Razorback's head snapped toward him. Tauren froze, eyes wide. Nolan clicked his tongue once, soft and low, then dragged his boot against the floor in a slow arc. The animal turned back to him. That is it, Nolan murmured. Look over here. Darius stared from the floor, breathing too fast. Why is it listening to you? It is not listening, Nolan said. It is choosing the least confusing thing in the room. He caught the first rod, then a second, and laid them in a shallow angle between two overturned desks. Not a cage, not a trap, a guide, something to make the easiest path look like the safest path. Back in Montana, his father had once spent an hour moving a frightened horse through a broken gate without touching it. Nolan had been 13, cold, bored, and sure there had to be a faster way. His father had only said, "Fast is for people who do not mind cleaning up slow mistakes." Nolan understood that sentence better now. "Mavek," he said, pointing to the student pinned near the front marker. "Can you move your foot?" Mavek shook his head, trembling. His species had hollow bones and a voice like a flute when he was not terrified. "It is caught." "All right. You are not going to pull. You are going to breathe. Serafina, go to him." Serafina hesitated. She was used to giving orders, not taking them, and Nolan could see the old version of her fighting to stay alive inside the new one. Then she moved. Carefully, quietly. "What do I do?" she asked. "Keep his hands still and talk to him. Nothing high-pitched. Tell him boring things. Boring things. Weather. Food. Homework. Anything that does not sound like dying." Her jaw tightened, but she knelt beside Mavek and began speaking in a soft, even voice about academy exam schedules. It was probably the strangest comfort speech Nolan had ever heard, but it worked. Mavek stopped shaking quite so hard. The Razorback took another step. Nolan could see the transport tag blinking under its side. Blue, blue, blue. Too bright. Too close to its line of sight. "Darius," Nolan said, "I need your jacket." Darius stared at him like he had spoken another language. "What? Your jacket? The shiny crest is bothering it." "This is my family crest." Nolan finally looked at him fully. No anger. No drama. Just the flat, tired patience of somebody standing between a bad choice and a worse one. "You can keep the crest or keep breathing easy. Pick one." Darius swallowed. Then he stripped off the jacket and slid it across the floor. Nolan used the canvas belt to tie the jacket around the end of a rod, dulling the blinking light and blocking the animal's view of Mavek. The Razorback slowed again. Across the room, students who had laughed at him 10 minutes earlier now waited for Nolan to tell them how to breathe, where to look, when to move. He hated how heavy that felt. He hated that being right had not made him feel better. "Professor," Nolan said, still watching the animal. "How long until real containment gets through that door?" Voss checked the panel. "For minutes." For minutes. In a classroom, that sounded short. In front of a frightened animal and 17 panicked students, it was a lifetime. Nolan rolled his sore shoulder once and felt pain spark down his arm. He ignored it. The Razorback lowered its head, not charging, just deciding. Nolan knew that look. "Everybody stay quiet," he said. "It is about to test the room." Serafina looked up at him. "And what are you going to do?" Nolan tightened the belt around his wrist and stepped into the open path. "Make sure it tests me first." The Razorback tested the room the way nervous animals test fences, not with anger, but with questions nobody else knew how to answer. It shifted left, stopped, lowered its plated head, then took one quick step toward the space between Nolan and Mavek. Every student along the wall flinched at once. Nolan lifted one hand without looking back. "Do not move." His voice stayed calm, but inside his chest his heart was working like it wanted out. He could feel sweat under his collar. He could feel the thin academy floor through his boots and the old canvas belt biting into his wrist. He was not fearless. That was the part none of them understood. Fearless people got careless. Nolan was scared enough to pay attention. The Razorback huffed and angled toward the shiny floor panel where Mavek's foot was caught. Mavek made a small sound, almost a whimper, and Serafina immediately leaned closer to him. "Look at me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Northern History exam is still unfair. I filed a complaint this morning. It was 14 pages. Mavek blinked at her, confused and terrified. 14. 17, if you include citations. Nolan would have laughed if the animal had not taken another step. Darius whispered from behind an overturned desk. "Pierce, move back." Nolan kept his eyes on the Razorback's shoulders. "No, it is going around you." "I know." "Then move." Nolan's jaw tightened. "Mavek cannot." That ended the conversation. Not because Darius agreed, but because for the first time all day, he heard something in Nolan's voice that was not patience. It was a line. Quiet, simple, and not up for debate. The Razorback moved again, drawn by Mavek's shaking hands and the faint flicker of the trapped floor panel. Nolan slid 1 foot to the side, blocking the easiest path without making himself look like a wall. Animals did not like walls. Walls meant panic. Paths meant choices. His father had taught him that during a bad winter when a neighbor's cattle broke through a fence and scattered across an icy county road, you never win by proving you are stronger than fear. You win by giving fear somewhere safe to go. Darius, Nolan said, I need you to crawl to the training rack behind you. Darius froze. What? There are foam marker shields in the bottom slot. Matt Gray. No lights. Slide 2 of them towards Seraphina. You just told me not to move. I told you not to move like prey. Darius stared at him. The insult that usually would have come next never showed up. He got low, moved slowly, and reached the rack. His hands shook as he pulled out the shields. Like this. Slower. Darius slowed down. Good. The word seemed to hit him harder than any insult would have. He slid the shields across the floor. Seraphina caught one and placed it between Mavek and the flickering panel. Nolan pointed with 2 fingers. Cover the light. Do not cover his face. She obeyed without arguing. The Razorback stopped. Its attention shifted from Mavek to Nolan again. Nolan breathed out through his mouth. 4 minutes had become 3. 3 had become something that felt much longer than a whole school year. Professor Voss said from the platform, Containment reports 60 seconds to breach clearance. No loud entry, Nolan said. Tell them no sirens when the door opens. Voss hesitated. Nolan did not turn around. Professor. Voss swallowed. Understood. The Razorback suddenly backed away from the shield, confused by the changing light, then swung toward the cluster of students near the west wall. A young student named Oro lost control and started to rise. Nolan saw it happen, saw the room about to break again. Oro, sit down. Oro froze halfway up. The animal turned toward him. Nolan stepped fully into the open. Seraphina looked up sharply. Nolan. He did not look at her. Keep talking to Mavek. What do I say? Anything. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. The cafeteria tea is terrible, she said to Mavek. Everyone pretends it is refined because the cups are expensive. Mavek gave a tiny, frightened laugh. The Razorback heard the sound and hesitated, head tilting, trying to understand a room that had stopped screaming. Nolan lowered his shoulders and held the jacket-wrapped rod out to the side, making himself the clearest, calmest thing in front of it. That is it, he murmured. Stay with me. Darius crawled up beside him, still pale, still scared, but there. What do you need? Nolan glanced at him for less than a second. When I move right, you slide that desk left. No hero stuff. Just make the path. Darius nodded. No joke. No sneer. Just a nod. For the first time since Nolan had arrived at the academy, one of them was not asking what a human could survive. He was asking how to help one. Nolan moved right, and for one clean second, the entire room moved with him. Darius slid the desk left exactly when he was supposed to. Seraphina kept her voice low beside Mavek, talking about cafeteria tea, exam complaints, anything small enough to keep panic from growing teeth. Tauren covered the last blinking panel with a foam shield. Oro sat down and pressed both hands over his mouth, eyes wide, but silent. The Razorback followed Nolan's jacket-wrapped rod, not because it trusted him, not because he had tamed anything, but because he had become the only steady point in a room that had finally stopped screaming. The containment door behind the glass gave a heavy click. Nolan heard it. The Razorback heard it too. Its head snapped toward the sound. No sirens, Nolan said, sharp but quiet. Professor Voss repeated it into his console with a voice that sounded older than it had 10 minutes ago. No sirens. No lights. Manual entry only. The outer lock hissed. The animal lowered itself, confused by the new air pressure. Nolan could feel the moment sliding away from him. A frightened creature did not need a reason to bolt. It only needed a direction. And the easiest direction was straight towards Seraphina, Mavek, and the half-covered floor panel. Nolan thought of home then, not in some heroic way, not with flags or speeches, but in pieces. His mother calling from the kitchen that dinner was getting cold. His father kneeling beside a fence post in the snow, showing him how to keep his hands calm around a spooked horse. The smell of pine sap on a jacket. The sound of wind pushing hard against a barn door at 2 in the morning. Earth did not teach courage like a slogan. Earth taught it as a chore. You did what needed doing because someone had to, and sometimes that someone was you. Darius, Nolan said. When I say now, push the desk one more foot. Darius stared at him. That puts you in front of it. Yes. Pierce, 1 foot. No more. Serafina looked up, her polished composure gone. Nolan, there has to be another way. There usually is, he said. We ran out of time. The containment team cracked the door open behind the observation glass. A dark, padded chute extended into the room, designed to guide the animal out without hurting it. Good. Almost good enough. Nolan shifted the rod lower, drawing the razorback's focus back to him. Now. Darius pushed. The desk scraped. The animal startled and surged forward, not attacking, just trying to escape the wrong sound. Nolan stepped into its path and turned his shoulder the way his father had taught him never to turn unless he had no choice. The impact knocked the air out of him and sent pain flashing bright behind his eyes, but his feet held just long enough. He hooked the canvas belt around the projection rod, pulled the jacket across the animal's line of sight, and dropped his weight hard to the side, using the lower academy gravity like a gift he had not asked for. The razorback stumbled into the open lane between the desks. Shoot, Nolan gasped. Open it wider. The containment team obeyed. For once, nobody argued with the human. The animal ran where the room finally let it run, straight into the padded chute and through the containment lock. The door sealed with a deep, blessed thud. For 2 seconds, the room did not understand that it was over. Then Mavek started crying softly, more from relief than pain. Serafina wrapped one arm around his shoulders and stared at Nolan across the wrecked classroom. Darius was on his knees beside the desk, breathing hard, his family crest jacket still tied around a training rod like any other piece of cloth. Nolan tried to stand, but his left shoulder refused the idea. He sat down instead, slow and careful, his back against an overturned marker stand. Is everyone alive? He asked. Nobody answered right away. The question was too plain, too human, too impossible after what they had believed about him. Professor Voss stepped down from the platform, his hands shaking as he checked the room. Yes, he said at last. Everyone is alive. Nolan closed his eyes for half a second. Good. When he opened them, Darius was looking at him as if every insult he had ever said had come back and filled his mouth with stones. Serafina stood, her voice barely above a whisper. You could have let it kill the thing. Nolan looked toward the sealed containment door. It was scared. So were you. Yes. The answer landed harder than any brag could have. Nolan pressed his good hand against the floor and tried not to show how badly his shoulder hurt. Outside the glass, instructors, containment officers, and academy officials stared in complete silence. Inside the room, nobody laughed. Nobody whispered Deathworlder like it was a joke. They had finally seen one up close, and he was not what they had feared. He was tired, hurt, breathing through pain, and still asking whether everyone else was okay. The hearing was held that afternoon in a glass chamber high above the academy courtyard, where the upward fountains kept pretending the universe worked better when gravity behaved. Nolan sat at the end of a long white table with his left arm in a medical sling and a cup of water untouched in front of him. His shoulder ached every time he breathed too deep, but the silence in the room hurt in a different way. Across from him sat the academy board, 6 officials in formal robes, their faces arranged into the kind of concern people use when they are already deciding who to blame. Professor Voss stood near the wall, looking smaller without a classroom under his control. Darius sat 2 seats away from Nolan, hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Serafina stood beside Mavek, who had been cleared by the medical team and refused to leave until he gave his statement. The board chair folded her fingers. Mr. Pierce, the Academy recognizes your unusual response under pressure. However, there are concerns that your actions may have escalated the specimen's movement pattern. Nolan looked at her for a long second. He thought about the wall breathing before it opened. He thought about Darius lifting the baton. He thought about every warning that had been treated like a joke because it came from the wrong mouth. Ma'am, he said, that animal was scared before I stood up. The chair's expression did not change. And yet you acted outside assigned command structure. Darius moved first. Just a small shift, but everyone noticed. His voice came out rough. He acted because I did not. The room turned toward him. Darius stared at the table, unable to hide behind a smirk now. I ignored him. I made it worse. If he had followed our command structure, Mavek would not be sitting here. No one spoke. Then Serafina stepped forward, calm again, but not cold. Nolan Pierce warned us before the failure. He gave clear instructions when the rest of us froze. He protected the injured, preserved the specimen, and prevented panic from becoming the real danger. If this academy calls that escalation, then this academy has confused obedience with wisdom. Professor Voss closed his eyes. The words landed harder because everyone knew she had once believed the opposite. The board chair finally looked at Nolan. What remedy are you requesting? It was a strange question. Nolan could have asked for suspensions, public apologies, a formal reprimand, maybe even a message sent to Earth admitting the academy had mocked the one student who saved their perfect classroom. For a moment, the angry part of him wanted it. The tired part wanted to go home. But then he looked through the glass at the courtyard below, at students moving between shining buildings, at fountains pouring the wrong way, at a place so advanced it had forgotten that fear does not care how expensive the walls are. Do not punish them for being scared, Nolan said. Teach them what fear is before you test them on courage. The chair blinked. Nolan kept going, his voice quiet, plain, almost embarrassed by how much it mattered. Back home, my dad used to say courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the next right thing while fear is standing right there with you. You taught them protocols. You did not teach them humility. There is a difference. Darius looked up then. Pierce, he said, and the name sounded different without the insult wrapped around it. I am sorry. Nolan nodded once. I know. That was all. Not forgiveness as a performance. Not revenge. Just a door left open if Darius was willing to become better than the boy who had walked into class that morning. The next day, Nolan returned to Xenosurvival Ethics with his arm still in a sling and his old notebook under his good hand. No one laughed when he walked in. Serafina was already there, sitting in the seat beside his usual desk. She placed a new paper notebook in front of him, simple, gray, and clearly bought from the human supply store on campus. For your notes, she said. Nolan glanced at it. You know neural imprints are faster. I heard manual writing helps with memory. From across the room, Darius cleared his throat. The seat behind you is empty, he said. If you want someone watching your blind side. Nolan looked at him, then at Serafina, then at the quiet classroom. For the first time since coming to Valorian, the silence did not feel like judgment. It felt like people thinking. He opened the new notebook, clicked his pen, and wrote one line at the top of the page. A strong world does not make strong people. Hard lessons do, if they survive them with mercy. Outside, the fountains kept rising. Inside, the class finally learned why Earth had always seemed so dangerous. It was not because humans loved danger. It was because they knew danger well enough to respect it. And respect was the first lesson every civilized species forgot right before the room fell apart.